So in one of the previous videos, I opened the discussion about certain statues which we are told that the sculptors made them out of stone, but when you look at this mesh, you start wondering how did he hit the stone, and the explanations that they give to people officially, like they were rubbing it with pumice. I tried it myself, it doesn't work at all. So actually I got interesting replies from a couple of historians who told me that actually even as recent as one generation ago they were teaching completely different things to the art history students, that these statues were indeed cast out of geopolymer, or so to say artificial stone. They were not made by chiseling a piece of hard rock. One of the replies I got in this regard was, I believe, from a very senior art historian in Poland, who still remembered that when she was young, they would teach completely different stuff to the art historians. And it is only recently that they simply changed the curriculums and started telling the people all this is chiseled out. People from America also wrote me, those who remember the old times, the same story. And looking at the actual artifacts, it becomes clear that what they were teaching before corresponds to the reality. What did they chisel this with? Needles? And since the penguins are paid and lured with cheap penguin food to keep us in increasingly deeper ignorance, now they started teaching different things to the art students, that these were things made out of solid rock. Here somebody took images of an ancient statue as they were taking it out of the ground. So you can see the armature inside. It was cast, a lot of casting was going on in antiquity. But casting alone doesn't explain everything. Often we see layers upon layers of very fine and detailed lace. That's why casting in a pre-ready mold, at least the way we do it nowadays, cannot explain all the statues. Most of them, but not all. One very common thing for many ancient and historic statues from other periods is that they have these tiny drill holes, really lots of them. So a very interesting observation was made by a worker who works in a modern factory which uses a 3D printer. The thing is that the modern 3D printers are not perfect and sometimes they do make mistakes. And this is how defective pieces look like. These small holes appear on them, although they were not planned, they were not supposed to be there. It's quite interesting that they look exactly like the small holes on the old statues. Now, drill holes by themselves don't necessarily point towards any advanced machining. These are some relatively simple tools that could do the job. But when we see the holes on fine pieces like this, the question arises, so the artist, he really took care to even make the pupils, even hairs on the eyebrows, locks of hair, and then everything is spoiled by these rough holes. If these holes were on some very rough statue, yeah, they could be consistent with the overall quality of the work. But if somebody was indeed spending countless hours of manual work to do these superfine statues, we would have expected that he would have been much more careful not to let these ugly holes spoil everything. But that is if these pieces were a product of countless hours of manual work. If they were manufactured with a machine, then everything falls into place. These holes were simply defects, and they look exactly like the defects that the modern 3D printers leave. I personally can't imagine how could relatively simple people produce 3D printers, which doesn't mean it's not possible, but maybe all these statues, actually most of the historic sculptures we see in the museums, by far most of them, are probably not historic at all. Or they belong to relatively very recent historic periods when they were cooking up the false history which we are taught in school just to have something historic to exhibit. Or maybe to replace the uncomfortable, hidden, or destroyed real artifacts. In this curious 19th century book about the various mediums and techniques used in art, there is an entire chapter about softening stone. They say chiseling hard stone is boring. Let's cut it with knife like butter. And then they mention certain Ferdinand de Bellevue, who apparently knew which type of stone in what kind of oven should be put so that it becomes like modeling clay. Interestingly enough, even when it cools down, the stone will remain like clay, so soft until you don't put some other substance on it. They don't give the exact recipe in this book, but this is a technical book, it's not a fantasy book. But later on, they continue giving more details about softening stone using the fire of some special gases. I wouldn't be surprised if the famous Peruvian mystery megaliths were erected using some similar softening technique. So from this and a few other printed edition of those times, which I'm gonna show you shortly, it really becomes clear that what these senior art historians wrote me by email is the absolute truth. Just a couple of generations ago, this was common knowledge, and it was not even hidden. It would appear openly in the print. A lot of what we now call chiseled statues were actually cast statues. Another excellent example, the statue of the Montferrand character from St. Petersburg. The penguins have prepared an answer for those who may wonder how was this made. On the plate in front of the statue, they list the names of the natural stones of which the statue is made. In the modern specialized literature, they even have very detailed story about the quarries from which the stones allegedly came, and other very minor details of how everything was made. All kinds of gossip details, except how exactly did they make it. So that's the explanation offered by the modern penguins. Let's see what people wrote about it 200 years ago, which was more or less the times when such statues were still being made. The title of the book is about the importance of chemistry in the fields of science and art. Here they say that the granite for all these marvelous pieces of art was made by mixing various ingredients and heating them to a specific temperature in a specific way. This is yet another book dating to the same period, Spravotchnik Kustarya. You can download it for free in Russian, link in the description. Here they give the actual recipes for making all these stone mixtures. Not just one, there is a good choice of types of materials that you can choose from. And of course, the contemporary descriptions of how people would make such statues are closer to the truth, obviously looking at the artifacts as well. And the statues are just a small fraction of the full picture. The entire St. Petersburg and many other European palaces made at the same time have used the same technique of casting or plastering with such mixtures or other techniques which we don't know about. Now we are told that these are marble slabs. It's kind of too thin to be a slab, it looks more like plastering. So why all this deliberate attempt to deceive us, to hide from us that in the past people knew how to soften stones, they knew the recipes of mixtures for making artificial stones and making apparently complex molds for such casting? After all, we ended up doing it with modern means anyway. Well, there are a couple of reasons for deceiving us in such a way. One of them is the obvious, to perpetuate this illusion that people in the past were backwards and they didn't know as much as we do. But even a more important reason is that when we are told that hooray, hooray, we discovered recently how to make stones, mixtures, geopolymers, and we certainly do, but under the condition that the methods and the recipes are no longer ecological friendly, they're no longer accessible for the common people. You will always rely on central supplies or technology to be able to use this knowledge. You will always need some special ingredients, and you will not be able to create stuff as a free man, because always to get those ingredients or recipes or special tools, you will have to be a part of the digital slavery system in one form or another. While our forefathers, they were free. They could go out and dig the ingredients or find them out there in nature. And in return, they didn't need to pollute and destroy this nature just to make their home or art out of these ingredients. And hiding the knowledge of how to work with soft stone is just the tip of the iceberg. For example, recently I was browsing a book which is just a bit more than 100 years old. And since it is a relatively recent book, of course, most of its content is very similar to the history preached in modern times. Similar but not the same. And the changes, the modernization of history, was not at all random. And I noticed two particular points about which they are particularly keen on obscuring, blurring, deceiving us, and they are doing it slowly since hundreds of years. Although the social organizations on ground which they bribe to do the work change as the different regimes in the society change, the trends, those who pull the strings on the top, they are the same who have been doing it for hundreds of years, and they know very well what they are doing. The first thing which they want to blur is, of course, the identity and the presence of the people I call survivors, Mauro Urbini called them Ressenami, the scattered people. So, any reference to them, direct or indirect? Any story, any hint that somebody came and gave knowledge and culture to simple tribes? That is gradually removed under all kinds of pretexts. Like, for example, now we know that these are legendary fantasy tribes. They didn't really exist. Or, oh, this was just a language group. The people didn't really exist. It's just an idea from the language distribution. Or other lies like recent findings have shown a different story. And then the second area in which those who tamper with the history are keenly interested is the history of the races. Although this 100-year-old book was not directly telling the truth, which is that the various races of humans are actually hybrids between the cavemen and all the, you can call them extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings who came and mixed with the original prototypes. Although that is not there, there were still some hints left, even as close as 100 years ago, that, for example, the races were not restricted to the areas allotted to them by the modern penguins. The modern story they're selling is that, you see, the Asians, they always lived in Asia. That's why they're different from the others, because they adapted to the Asian environment. And the same applies to all the other races. According to this story, the Africa always belonged to the dark race. They are telling us that people could not have mixed anyway because faraway travel was extremely rare, if possible at all. And when mummies of another race are found in a given region, or skeletons of giants or dwarfs, this doesn't fit the modern penguinian story, so they just hide them or destroy them. But even 100, 200 years ago, apparently the memories of this mixing of various not only human but also non-human races, dwarfs, giants, so these memories were still fresh even 100, 200 years ago, and it was too early to declare them fictional, and so they were still somewhat present in the history, at least hints of them. For example, I have videos about dwarfs openly maintaining contacts with people in Siberia a couple of generations ago. There was trade going on still. Also, I've seen very interesting research showing that even at the dawn of photography, there were still many giant people actually, much more than nowadays. And most likely, at the current moment, they have managed successfully to get rid of all the uncomfortable skeletons and remains. And also because with time, as people were mixing more and more, the genetic pool became more and more homogeneous. Now they can safely declare all that as fantasy. For example, after decades of hard work of destroying and hiding all the remains and records of giants, now they are ready to say, there were no giants, of course. Where are the giants? We don't see any giants. With the dwarfs, it was probably even easier for them because, being magical beings, they didn't tend to bury their dead in the ground, it seems. And what's the entire point of all this stupid hiding of history? What are they up to? The single most important thing that they want to blur and hide is the real spirituality. And that was the central pivotal point in the lives of our forefathers. This was the most important thing for them. That transpires from the rare, really genuine old inscriptions, from the legends. But their idea of what spirituality is all about is quite different from the understanding of the modern people, and quite radically different from modern religions. And the thing is that in our genetic code, it's not just cavemen, there were also powerful magicians, and other races left magical imprints. In our genetic code, we have abilities which are now mostly dormant, but they can be activated. Which is, of course, the worst nightmare of the parasitic vampires who are sucking the blood out of the humanity now. If too many people start activating their dormant magical abilities, then also too many people will grasp the main point that we are enslaved in an artificial holographic reality which we create ourselves, instigated by the forces of evil, and getting out of this predicament is relatively easy for those who have developed their subtle vision to the extent of directly perceiving how the fabric, this all-pervading energy of the Creator God, manifests in various holographic realities directed by the thoughts and intentions of the beings who reside in these realities. To most people, this will sound like some sort of colorful, new agey fantasy, because that is how the mass media has distorted our understanding of what spirituality is. They present it as some sort of abstract, unreal fantasy. While the truth is exactly the opposite, understanding the fabric from which the holographic reality in which we live manifests is much more real than the computer in front of you, because the computer, along with all the solid objects around, they're just props in this holographic reality in which we reside. For our forefathers, spirituality meant the direct ability to work with that fabric of the creation which actually causes the various props to manifest. Or, in modern language, we call it things that happen to us by chance. We have also invented words like good luck and bad luck. So the more the common people understand how to change the energies which cause the good or bad luck, or the energies which cause the natural disasters around, or the weather, the more they will become masters of their own lives. And that's what the vampires don't want. That's why the vampires want to disconnect us from our wise forefathers. That's why they destroy all genuine books on spirituality. And indeed, they have even convinced most people recently that there were no great forefathers at all. Those were legends of fantasy things which never happened. There were only cavemen and monkeys.